This podcast is made possible by you, the supporters of WPLN and WNXP, Nashville Public Radio.
This is the Nashvillager Podcast. It's May 12th, 2026. And according to legend, it was either on this day or the next in 1637 that Cardinal Richelieu invented the table knife. Or maybe you'd prefer to call it the butter knife. You know, the standard blunt-edged, round-tipped knife that's great for spreading things or cutting most cooked foods, but not sharp enough to pose any threat as a weapon. As the story goes, the cardinal was fed up with bad behavior involving sharp daggers on the part of his dinner guests. And the problem in question wasn't what you might think, though. They weren't getting into fights and threatening each other. Nothing like that. Evidently, he was bothered by people picking food out of their teeth with the pointy tips. It's quite an image, especially when you consider that he was the chief advisor to the French King Louis XIII, so the people eating at his table were among the wealthiest elites there were back then. The image of folks in flowing robes picking at their teeth with knives kind of undercuts the elegance, no? Basically, he was grossed out. His solution was to have a set of knives altered, the tips ground down and blunted. He set the trend. People followed in suit. And now, well, here we are. I'm Nina Cardona, and this is your daily digest of what's happening around Middle Tennessee with historical context from Nashville Public Radio, WPLN News. Well, Nashville restaurants may set their tables with knives the cardinal himself would approve of. But here lately, it sure sounds like a lot of restaurateurs might be daydreaming about using the sharper kind to get their point across to the city, especially the locally owned ones, and especially the ones downtown. Changes in their property tax bills are hitting businesses hard. That's particularly challenging for the kinds of operations that run on relatively thin margins. Smaller, non-chain food service businesses are a prime example of that scenario. It doesn't help matters that many of those locally owned hospitality businesses in Nashville rent space under a kind of lease that makes them responsible for paying the property tax. The sudden leap up in operating costs is putting some out of business, while many others sound the alarm that they could be next. And of course, other folks in the community are also seeing bigger bills and wondering if they'll be able to pay them. But why are the tax bills jumping up? And is this just a Nashville thing? Well, I'll answer the second question first. No, it is absolutely not just a Nashville thing. In fact, several other counties around the mid-state are in a situation that has people nervous about paying property taxes one way or the other. But while the end result is the same, the details do vary according to which community you're talking about. And to understand any of them, you've got to understand how property tax laws work in Tennessee. Now, there are two numbers that determine how much property tax a homeowner or business owes. There's the property value, which is based on the county's estimate of what the fair market value would be if someone was going to sell that property. This is considered a way of keeping things fair and proportional. The shifts in assessments are supposed to reflect changes in where wealth or poverty is concentrated so that no one is over or undertaxed. The assessment isn't actually how much it would sell for. There's a formula to keep the assessed value lower than what the sale price would be. But ultimately, it is a reflection of how that property would do on the open market. So the neighborhood, the condition of the property, all of those things factor in. The other big piece is the tax rate. And that's the same across a city or county, no matter where you are or how fancy the building is. It's a standard percentage. To put the two numbers together and calculate the tax bill, you use the rate as a percentage that's applied to the value. So if it's a 5% tax rate, for every $100 of assessed value, you pay $5. Of course, it can feel really uncomfortable that the same government that gets the tax money is the one that's setting both the rate and the value, which is why there are rules in state code for how the property assessments are supposed to work. And there are protections in place meant to keep local officials from overtaxing people. Perhaps the most substantial example of those protections is the requirement that new property tax assessments have to be revenue neutral. In other words, they can't just jack up everybody's property value in order to make more money in tax revenue. The total amount brought into the local government via property tax has to stay the same. So if enough property is valued higher because sale prices have edged up all over the county, then the rate, the tax rate, is adjusted down. That balances things out. So the end figure is the same. People in a neighborhood where sales have been super hot will still pay more no matter what, because even with the lowered rate, their value is proportionally much higher than it used to be. But struggling neighborhoods could see tax bills go down thanks to one of those rate adjustments. Now, if the city or county does just flat out need more revenue, that still can happen, just not through appraisals. To do that, officials have to raise the rate, which is a much more straightforward and open process that the public can follow and comment on. So, getting back to what's happening on the ground right now. Several mid-state communities are considering a property tax rate hike right now. For example, in Clarksville, they're talking about going from a rate of just under 1% to an additional 31 cents per dollar of assessed value. 31 cents doesn't sound like a lot, but multiply that by the value of a structure and, well, it's the kind of amount everyone will definitely feel. In other places, the concern is a big uptick in the assessed values. Wilson County's latest round of assessments came in 66% higher than last time. And in Davidson County, the median assessment rose by 45%. And remember how different neighborhoods fluctuate more or less in assessments related to how well things are selling there? Well, this time around, the valuations for property in places like downtown reflected the fact that real estate transactions are setting record highs. Before the assessment letters were sent out, the Nashville Business Journal reported last year that Lower Broadway was experiencing a billion-dollar boom thanks to a surge in properties changing hands for more and more money. And state code basically says that has to be factored in. There is sometimes a little leeway, and to what extent it could, Metro did hold back on increasing valuations for hard-hit industries and neighborhoods during and immediately after the pandemic. There was some degree of hesitance during that time for some counties to adjust tax rates up, too. But right now we're seeing the very difficult boomerang effect that happens when the local government decides it has to get back to taxation as usual if it's going to have the money to keep providing the services people expect. The incremental increases that didn't happen for a while are now happening all at once, and they're a shock. And let's be super clear, because of the way Tennessee has structured its tax code, local governments only have a couple of levers to pull. And property tax is the biggest one available to them. And there was legislation at play this year that attempted to make it more difficult for communities to raise the tax rate. That didn't get anywhere, but also only would have to deal with one part of the equation. So the end result is that these hospitality businesses on the hook for the property tax in buildings that are worth more and more are in a really tough spot. They're being hit with the kind of tax bills that show a hefty increase even after the overall rate is adjusted down, and that's killing their margins. In just a few minutes, a book 50 years in the making. That's coming up after the newscast.
There are 3 gleaming golden portraits on the front of Nashville's historic courthouse and city hall. Who are they? Curious Nashville found out they're all historical lawmakers, King John, Moses, and Justinian. They were etched into those glass windows in 1937, and they're not in pristine shape anymore. See photos or ask us your question at WPLN.org/curious.
Curious Nashville.
Here's the latest from WPLN News. Tennessee is responding to legal challenges to the new congressional map lawmakers approved last week, splitting Memphis into 3 different districts. Last night, the ACLU joined a growing list of opposition groups suing over the maps. WPLN's Mariana Bacchiao reports.
The ACLU, the NAACP, and the Tennessee Democratic Party have all filed separate lawsuits challenging different aspects of the map. But they all have the same goal: to block the new congressional maps from going into effect. The ACLU alleges that the new maps disenfranchise Black voters in Memphis. The Democratic lawsuit represents voters and candidates like Columbia Mayor Chaz Mulder. He's been campaigning against and out fundraising Republican incumbent Andy Ogles for the 5th Congressional District. The new maps put Mulder in an entirely new district. And while the legislature has waived residency requirements for candidates, plaintiffs argue it's too close to the 2026 midterms and will likely cause voter confusion. So far, Tennessee's Attorney General argues that the NAACP doesn't have standing to challenge the maps or the residency requirement. The Tennessee Supreme Court will soon decide whether a 3-judge panel will take up that complaint. Mariana Bacchiao, WPLN News.
In an effort to prevent children from being held back, Memphis Shelby County Schools will require all its 3rd graders to retake the English Language Arts section of the state's standardized test on the last 2 days of the school year. Tennessee law requires students to enroll in summer camp, take intensive tutoring, or both if they don't score proficient on that section of the TCAP, or they can do a retake. But because the state will not disclose who fell short until the next to last day of school, Memphis is going ahead and administering a retake to every third grader. Chalkbeat reports Metro Nashville Public Schools are also considering their options. They won't know who failed until the very last full day of classes. Before a healthcare facility can open in Tennessee, it must do a stringent study of supply and demand. Lawmakers have been trying to cut back on that requirement for years. WPLN's Catherine Sweeney reports that during this legislative session, they made a major stride in cutting back on opening requirements.
The process is called Certificate of Need, or CON. Healthcare companies spend millions of dollars on studies to show there is more demand in the area than current providers can meet, and then the state signs off on or blocks the project. Tennessee has already gotten rid of CON requirements for some types of specialized facilities, and this year they ended the requirement for freestanding ERs and acute care hospitals. There is opposition. It comes from people who want to protect safety net hospitals. Those primarily serve people who either can't pay or pay with TennCare, which sometimes doesn't even cover the cost of service. Those facilities need privately insured patients to come offset that cost. But without the CON process keeping competitors out, a fancier hospital can come in and lure those high-paying patients away. State Senator Rameshak Berry, a Memphis Democrat, was one of the few votes against this bill.
They're a check on our healthcare market to make sure that we're looking at access and not necessarily looking at profit.
Senate Finance Chair Bo Watson, who authors a lot of healthcare legislation, said this kind of reform is critical in Tennessee. It's already financially challenging to run a hospital in an underserved or rural area. The expensive and lengthy CON process can be an unclearable obstacle for companies wanting to open hospitals.
We cannot continue to do the same things that we've been doing and expect healthcare, one, to get less expensive, and two, get more accessible to the people we represent.
He noted that this was one of the policies Tennessee promised the federal government in its application for $1 billion in rural health funding. Catherine Sweeney, WPLN News.
The Nashville area real estate market saw a strong month in April. That's according to the latest figures from the Greater Nashville Realtors. Data shows sales are up 4% over last year with increased closings and higher prices for single-family homes. The median price crested $500,000. The supply of housing on the market is also up. There's a 10% increase in the number of active listings compared to last April. Condo sales were roughly flat. Those prices have dipped, making them a more accessible entry point for first-time buyers. Still, the median condo sold for $345,000 last month. The Nash Trash Tours started carting people around town in a pink bus nearly 30 years ago. It was the brainchild of Brenda Kay and Sherry Lynn, better known as the Jug Sisters. Their rolling sister act is marked by wigs, makeup, and over-the-top humor. When This Is Nashville needed a power couple to kick off a new season of Next Age about romance and intimacy in the second half of life, Brenda Kay and Sherry Lynn took no convincing. Talking to host Blake Farmer, they brought the same candor and quips about their own love lives and aging bodies.
We never had kids. Neither did Sherry in all of her marriages. They never...
I'm barren.
Well, we had medical issues with that, too.
I see.
We both had fibroid tumors, and that was problematic for both of us. We're sister. It seems like everything happens with one sister,
Really?
the other sister has it. And both of us...
It really affected our lifestyles, both Brenda and I.
Yeah.
And when I decided to get it taken care
everything
of.
ripped out.
Shortly after that, she got everything taken care of.
Yeah.
And it really changed our lives.
Yeah,
It made it so much more, freeing. I mean, truly.
Yeah.
There was, when I had my full hysterectomy, we had like a ceremonious changing of the guards and the handing of the tampons and all this stuff to Brenda Kay. I said, here, this is your problem now. So, but then shortly after she had to hand her tampons to somebody else.
Yeah.
So it freed us up to be more... be able to do more things.
Brenda Kay and Sherry Lynn, the Jug Sisters. You can watch their interview at the WPLN YouTube channel or listen wherever you get podcasts and at thisisnashville.org. You'll find more news anytime at WPLN.org. Charlie Kastner, a longtime Louisville and Nashville Railroad employee and author, died last month. He co-wrote a book on one of L&N's most powerful steam locomotives titled Big Emma. That was the nickname for the engine that hauled passengers, freight, and coal in eastern Kentucky. WEKU's Curtis Tate talked with the co-author of the book.
It's been 70 years since the Big Emmas went cold. Also known as M1s, they were the Louisville and Nashville Railroad's last new steam locomotive, built in the 1940s as railroads were converting from coal power to diesel. Unfortunately, none of the 42 M1s were saved from the scrapper's torch. Kastner, who died last month at age 97, was an authority on the powerful steam locomotives. He wrote an article on them for Trains magazine in 1972. Co-author Ron Flannery grew up in Appalachia admiring the trains and the men who worked on them. He says he based the Big Emma book on Kastner's article and meticulous notes. Hi, Ron. Tell me about Charlie's writing. He was a storyteller, right?
He was less of a technical guy and more of a folksy kind of person, a writer. He captured a lot of the humanity, the people who designed and built and operated these locomotives, maintained them, tested them. That part of it comes out clearly. That's why I've always admired him so much as a writer. He had saved it was a box about this big of notes, correspondence, drawings, photographs, and stuff when he was doing that article, and it was like a treasure trove.
What did you want to convey to readers?
My intention was to put the reader on the jump seat behind the engineer. And so the engineer is pulling anywhere from 5,000 to a 10,000 ton freight train with one or two engines, depends on what route and everything. It's a little bit of Eastern Kentucky folklore in the way I see it. You're going back in time, and you're literally getting a window and a ride on an operation that was just everyday stuff back then. But it was fascinating whether you worked for the railroad or watched the trains go by. And it's long gone. All that's long gone. But I think so we tried to capture a lot of that history.
The railroad used to be involved in our everyday lives the way it no longer is for most people. Can you talk about that?
The railroad was involved in your personal life in just about every way. Your mail was delivered by the train. If you ordered something from Sears and Roebuck, a large item, it came by train. If you were a local merchant, whether at a hardware store, lumber company, appliances, it was delivered by train. Life literally evolved around a small town depot. You had two places where, people, the epicenter of the community might be, if it were a county seat, the courthouse and the railroad depot.
The men who ran the trains, operated these big steam engines, they were outsized figures in the public's imagination, right?
These guys within their community were somebody, that you knew. You knew that these guys, oh, he's an engineer for the L&N. So they were somebody, and they were, youngsters like me looked up to these guys like, wow, I can't imagine doing a job like that. I'd love to do that.
That was the Appalachian Mid-South Newsroom's Curtis Tate speaking with Ron Flannery about the book Big Emma. To see pictures of Big Emma, go to WEKU.org. Thanks for listening to the Nashville is Your Podcast. We take this look at news every weekday. If you like it, go ahead and subscribe on your favorite podcasting app and tell a friend. Or give us a mention on your socials. It really helps get the word out. And of course, everything at WPLN News is listener supported. You can become a member at WPLN.org. And that's it for today. Thanks so much for listening. Let's make this day a good one, and we'll catch back up tomorrow.